Well, hello again, my 1010 friends, and welcome to week 15, my video in which I'm going to discuss the final exam review sheet and the final exam practice run. So I'm going to do both of those combined into this one video, and it will be really important to your success on the final to tune in and listen to me and follow along. And you can do that by clicking on content and then looking for final exam materials in the left-hand sidebar. And first, click on final exam review sheet with me. So the final exam will only be open and visible to you from 8 o'clock a.m. until 11:59 p.m. on the day of our final, Monday, May the 2nd. So it will not be accessible to you or visible to you prior to or after those times. And so go to assignments and then look for final exam. And there you will see the specific instructions from the English department about the final exam, because all English 1010 classes take a common final exam. So I do not create it, rather the department creates those instructions in that prompt. You will not be able to submit the final after 11:59 p.m. on Monday, May 2nd, and will receive a 0 if your final is not submitted by that time. Note that you may and you should use your Little Seagull Handbook as you're writing for grammar help. You may also look up any words that you're not sure about from the instructions in a dictionary, either a hard copy or online. And note that the final exam for 1010 is always administered cold. And what that means is that students do not see the actual prompt question that directs their writing until they take the final exam. But we will be spending some review time this week looking at a sample prompt that should be helpful to you, and I'll encourage you to try your hand at actually writing a paragraph in response to this practice prompt question, and that will be what we're going to do in the next the latter half of this video. So here are the specifics for our final exam. You want to double space your paper. You want to type in Times New Roman 12-point font. You want to use a standard heading and MLA formatting at the top of your paper, as you would always do, with your name, my name, the course name, and the date in MLA formatting. So in this case, it would be 2 May 2022. And obviously, then your last name and a page number appears in the upper right-hand corner. So you want to include a brief title centered in the middle of your page just after that initial formal heading on page 1. Your title doesn't have to be fancy. For example, it could just simply state the purpose of your paper. And here's an example, a response to the English final exam prompt question. Your essay will only be 1 paragraph long. Students are usually pretty stunned to find that out. But it's not a full essay, it's only a paragraph in length. But that paragraph should be at least 200 words. Now, no one is going to sit and count all the words after you submit, but we are trained to be able to sort of eyeball it and know if you're in the ballpark there. You should have a word count feature on your computer, though, that will tell you whether or not you've reached the 200 words, and you should definitely make sure that you have reached that. So this is something important to note. You do not need a traditional hook like we've used in most of our papers for this short paragraph response. We can't be sure exactly what the prompt is going to ask of you yet. We, the professors, don't even know until the end because it's administered cold. And the reason for that is that the English department wants to see what you can do on your own without a lot of drilling in advance or teaching to the test with a final exam. But it might ask you something like considering the steps needed in the process of writing a paper. So you want to begin your response paragraph with a short introductory sentence or two that serves as a mini thesis. And here's an example of how to do this if in fact, let's imagine that the prompt does in some way relate to the writing process. In considering the writing process needed when completing a successful, researched, argumentative essay, one would first begin by blank. So you would ask yourself, well, what would be the very first step, right? And as you continue with your short paragraph, you would consider maybe every step of the writing process that we've thought about and engaged in this semester as we approach a major paper essay. So, one of the first things you're going to do is thoroughly read the assigned text on the topic. You might also make sure you thoroughly read the assignment sheet. Something else that you would do would be to discuss the text with your classmate or with your professor to figure out its important points. Another activity you would engage in would be finding reliable sources and reading through them very thoroughly. And then maybe engaging with your idea worksheet to brainstorm for ideas. Now, not every class will have an idea worksheet, or they may not call it that. That's what I call it. But basically, that part of the process is brainstorming for ideas and considering, okay, how am I gonna, how am I gonna organize this paper? What will my main points be, etc. So you want to create a working thesis. You want to create main points. You want to create, basic ideas that you might jot down or type out. Determine which source might best support your claims. You want to consider the counter arguments and consider the other side. If it's an argumentative paper, what are they going to have to say, right? And then figure out how might you create a rebuttal to their points. How would you respond to their points? You might create an outline of your paper. You might write a rough draft. That's a very important step. And edit it and get the feedback from your professor. You might engage in peer review or self-review, as we have done with this paper, or with paper 4, I should say. You might make the suggested changes as per your professor or your peer or your tutor's suggestion, and then you want to revise. You want to edit for typos and spelling errors, and then finally submit your final draft and make sure you do that on time. So those are just some ideas for, for maybe how you might go through the steps of the writing process. And so the next thing that I would ask you to do, and we're going to talk about this, as I just said in the second part of this same video, is engage in that final exam practice run by looking at the instructions on that sheet, which we're going to do in just a moment. But before we do that, let me just review some final exam policies, end of the semester policies that are helpful to know. So final grades for your classes are found by going to My Pellissippi, also called Banner, and looking under final grades. And while we as instructors are responsible obviously for grading your final exams and for submitting your final grades in the course into the system, we're not the ones who are responsible for allowing you to see them in My Pellissippi. That's the good folks in IT who manage all of that. So generally, though, grades become visible a day or two after we have posted them into the system. But if you were to email us and ask us when exactly they're going to appear, we cannot answer that question because, as I say, we're not the ones who actually manage that part of the process. So please do not email me asking that. Please do not email me asking what your grade on the final exam was or what was your grade for the class, since I'm very busy and just inundated at this point with grading and posting grades for over 100 people in 4 different classes, and there just isn't enough time to respond to individual inquiries for over 100 people and get the grading done on time, because we have a deadline that we must adhere to. Note that you can always see your current running total for grades for all the assignments in the class up to the point that I've graded them and posted them by going to grades on our Brightspace course page. Now, those grades can and will change as assignments are completed and figured in to the system. So, at different points in the semester, a student who actually has an A in the class might look at the running total and think, oh my gosh, I only have a C, or I have a D or something. But what you have to remember is that only the grades that have already been completed and placed in there are being calculated in the running total. So if there are remaining assignments, so like for example, if the final exam isn't in yet, if the paper 4 grade isn't in yet, those are big point makers. And obviously, that's not going to be reflective of your total grade in the class, and that will change. Grades are calculated by the Brightspace system, and I have never yet seen it fail. But I am old and I am old-fashioned, and I do not trust this highfalutin technology. So I keep a separate hard copy of grades that I manually enter, along with meticulous notes for each student, literally from day one. And toward the end of the semester, I compare Brightspace's calculations with my own calculations and notes to make sure that they are right, because I know that grades matter to you. So for paper 4, note that I will likely use only very brief comments or maybe editing marks only in the grading process, rather than full extensive comments like I normally make. The reason being that, again, we have to get through the grading of over 100 final papers and final exams at this point in the semester, and we just don't have enough time. There just aren't enough hours in the day to comment extensively again on those very last papers. But you can certainly, if I do use proofreading marks or abbreviation marks, you can certainly see those in a separate document entitled Proofreading Marks and Abbreviations that I will use in grading your papers to decipher the meanings of those editing marks. And it's up on Brightspace under Course Documents. But more than likely, I'll just use kind of brief comments. And then finally, I just want you to know that I've truly enjoyed having each of you in my class this semester, and I thank you for hanging in there with me. And if I can do anything to be of help to you in the future, I hope that you'll let me know, and that you'll stay in touch with me in the future and let me know how you're doing. And note that I am teaching 1020. More than likely I will be, unless that changes next semester. So, keep that in mind if you need that class. So now let's devote this last portion of this final video to the final exam practice run, and you'll find it in the same section under final exam materials. So as I said, all English 1010 classes use a common final exam, and that final exam is administered cold. That is to say, students do not know the actual prompt question they're considering until they actually take the final. And we professors do not even know for sure what it's going to be until toward the very end. So again, the reason is so that instructors can assess your writing and critical thinking processes entirely on the basis of the writing that you create during that final exam process, without a whole lot of preparation or teaching to the test or drafting beforehand. So that way we can assess what you've actually learned from the class more thoroughly. So to help you feel as prepared as possible, though, under those circumstances, we are going to consider the following sample final exam prompt that could be similar, it may or may not be, to the real prompt question and instructions. So it'll be somewhat similar, it may not be identical. So imagine that your English 1010 professor gives you the following argumentative essay prompt for a researched argumentative essay. So what does that mean? A paper you're writing where you have to take a side on an issue and argue it, and you have to do some research, just as we did in paper 4, to back up your claims. So here's the prompt, the hypothetical prompt. Considering the ongoing disputes regarding whether the COVID-19 vaccine should be made mandatory, should the government force individuals to receive the shot? So let's imagine that's the prompt that your professor gave you. Now, keep reading the instructions for the final because it can be deceiving. Using MLA format, please write a paragraph of at least 200 words that describes the writing process you would complete to write an argumentative essay that fulfills this prompt. Discuss all the steps you would take with that document from the time you first got the assignment sheet until you submitted the final version of your paper. Spend about 45 minutes carefully writing this paragraph. In this paragraph, please share your process as a writer in the production of this piece of writing, not your response to the prompt itself. So there's the tricky part. If you start thinking to yourself, oh, I'm supposed to agree or disagree about whether people should be required to have that COVID-19 vaccine, no, that's not what you're doing. What you're doing is writing a paragraph that describes the process you would go through if you were writing an essay on that prompt, right? So now that you have that simple prompt, think about every single step that you would engage in from the first time that you get the assignment sheet containing that prompt all the way up to the time when you submit your final draft of the paper. These steps that you would take in the writing process are what you're writing about for this sample final exam. You are not answering the prompt question itself, nor are you taking a position on the vaccine. So that's where you need to read very carefully, on the real final exam, read the instructions and don't let something like that trip you up. So what steps would you take to create a researched argument essay on this subject? Well, here are some of the steps we've emphasized this semester in the writing process. You would carefully read and consider the assignment sheet so that you fully understand the instructions there and the parameters of this paper. You would carefully read through and consider any readings that your instructor has assigned to you on the subject. You would read and research articles found through reputable sites like that Opposing Viewpoints and Contacts database from the library website, or a reliable site like procon.org. You would brainstorm for ideas to begin your writing. So you would do this in our class through the Idea Workshop Day that we've held. Maybe you might do it through meeting with a tutor or through discussing ideas with a classmate. So once you've done the reading, the research, the brainstorming for basic ideas, now you're going to get into the writing. You're going to create a hook and a working thesis statement that states your position for the reader. You're going to look for at least 3 main points to back up your position. So why should or shouldn't the government force individuals to receive the COVID vaccine? You're going to locate quotes from your chosen research sources that you can use in your paper that back up your claims. They might agree with your claims, or they might disagree. You might use them as the counter-argument. You're going to consider the counter-argument. How might the opposition refute your ideas, and how might you offer a respectful rebuttal back to each point of opposition? So then you're going to begin writing your rough draft, making sure you incorporate quotes and paraphrases, and citing them both in the body of your paper and on that separate works cited sheet. After engaging in peer review, or maybe self-review, after considering your instructor's feedback, you might refine your thesis and revise your draft accordingly. And then you're going to line edit your paper. You're going to go through and check for spelling and typos, grammatical errors, MLA issues. And then and only then are you going to turn in the final draft of your essay on time. Now, back in the very, beginning part of your writing process, you might include things like finding a quiet environment in which to write. Maybe some of you like to write by hand first. Write out your rough draft by hand or your ideas by hand to sort of clarify it in your mind a little bit more. So those are steps that you could include too in the writing process. So now what I'll ask you to do is try your hand at writing a 200-word minimum paragraph detailing the steps of the writing process as they would relate to writing a paper on this subject, should the COVID vaccine be mandated. And remember, you're not arguing this topic, this question, but rather you're detailing the steps that you would go about in the process of writing this paper. And so going through the practice run will be really, really helpful to you, because it will allow you to sort of get the gist of what the final exam might be like, even if the actual prompt is a little bit different than this sample one that we're looking at. So thank you again for being such a great group, and thanks for all your hard work, and best of luck on your final exams.